Governments must make choices about the balances of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberty refers to the individual freedoms, and equality refers to equal rights for different groups, and fraternity signifies reducing conflict between these groups. Democratic governments have a difficult time creating policies that strike a balance between these ideas. Recently, new challenges brought about pressures such as increased economic competitiveness and globalization and shifting demographics, as well as pressures from electoral changes inside the state, have also influenced the way in which governments determine the way they attempt to strike a balance between liberty, equality, and fraternity within their country.
All right, one especially difficult area for government to consider is that of religious liberty. Governments must determine the appropriate measures to take when considering religious liberty. For example, the Länder in Germany banned all religious symbols in schools except for Christian and Jewish symbols. In this way, Germany chose the liberty of the majority over the equality of all groups. This increases the fraternity among the majority groups, but decreases the fraternity between the minority groups and the majority groups, and decreases the equality of the minority groups. In contrast, France has chosen equality over liberty. In 2003, the French government passed legislation banning all religious symbols in public classrooms. This increased equality among all groups, but decreased fraternity among members of the majority. Some majority leaders, such as Jacques Le Pen, complained that the law was unjust because it failed to exempt Christian symbols, symbols that have represented France and its tradition for centuries. Another issue of religious equality concerns that of state recognition. In Serbia, for example, the Orthodoxy enjoys a higher privilege than the non-Orthodox traditions. In Italy, Islam is not officially recognized by the state because of its many different sects, while Jehovah's Witnesses are recognized, even though they comprise a much smaller group. France investigates potential cults, monitoring groups who they fear to become dangerous. Certain religious groups are very sensitive to blasphemous speech against their religion and think that governments should ban such speech. Governments handle the issue of free speech in different ways. For example, in the UK, speech that is seen as inciting hatred of religion has been criminalized in order to promote fraternity. However, this reduces civil liberties. In contrast, the Netherlands chose to repeal rather than extend blasphemy laws. Consequently, an offensive cartoon depicting a religious figure has recently stirred much violence and outrage throughout that country.
Governments also must consider anti-system groups and the tension that exists between radical fundamentalist and nationalist parties. They must decide whether or not to restrict the liberties of some or all of these nationalist groups. According to Cass Moody, European democracies are transforming slowly but steadily from the model of the Rechtsstaat, or legal state, to that of the Sicherheitsstaat, or the security state. While in the legal state, all citizens are equal before the law, in the security state, some have fewer rights than others. Initially, the limitation of legal protection was almost exclusively applied to foreign nationals, particularly alleged Islamic fundamentalists from non-Western countries. But some countries, including the United Kingdom, have started to apply measures of limited protection also to their own citizens. In recent years, the two most noteworthy anti-system groups are those on the radical right and religious fundamentalists. Governments have introduced differing solutions to this problem, such as the attempt to curb hate speech towards homosexuals in the United Kingdom. The debate begins, however, when ministers see this restriction of hate speech as a restriction on free speech, which limits the liberty of individuals. These ministers put the liberty of free speech above the points of national fraternity and equality. In the past, the majority of the problem has been with political terrorism. Currently, however, most of the anti-system problems facing Europe in recent years have been the uprising of radical Islamic groups attempting to have a voice in society, a form of religious terrorism. The rights of these minority groups to free speech, liberty, and equality often threatens the fraternity of society and even the safety of the majority. This is currently a continuing debate, for which the majority of Europe is still attempting to find a solution.
According to Haywood, it could be argued that in Europe today, corruption has replaced communism as democracy's most dangerous and perceived enemy. It would be imagined that reforming corruption is indisputably something governments should be working towards. However, there are many political scholars who view the attempt at corruption reformation as counterproductive to making the government appear more legitimate in the eyes of the people. Still, there are many benefits to regulating corruption. Most importantly, among these benefits is the increased legitimacy the government will have. Socially, this will increase the trust and confidence that people have in the government. Due to the high levels of corruption in Italy with Berlusconi, citizens do not respect the government or view it as a legitimate institution. Citizens will also experience the economic rewards of corruption regulation. Corruption generally benefits organized crime and undermines economic growth. States can also increase their soft power internationally if other nations do not view them as corrupt. This can lead to better relations internationally in economics and other foreign policy. Reduction of corruption would increase fraternity within a nation because there would be more trust placed into the system. And this would therefore create a feeling of national unity. Equality would be increased as well because the rights of the general population will come before those of individuals. Conversely, some scholars argue that regulating corruption can actually do harm to the success of the government. They argue that the focus governments place on the level of corruption when they attempt to reform it generally seems to increase the public's opinion of how high the corruption levels actually are. The reform attempts have proven essentially ineffective in decreasing the levels of corruption within a nation. Until there is a proven method of curbing corruption, the price tag both economically and in regard to the people's faith in the government, corruption actually should not be reformed so much. It increases liberty because there are less restrictions on what individuals can do, but it decreases equality because there are special privileges present within the system. On either side, it is generally accepted that corruption is eventually going to occur. The importance of the impact of this is what varies.
In Europe today, the levels of fraternity, equality, and liberty are constantly being debated. When one goes up, another one inevitably goes down, whether this be because of extreme radicalism, religious liberties, or the regulation of corruption. These are just a few of the examples where all of these different values come into play. The European countries are trying to decide which is more important, but often it is not an easy call.